The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the windows of our suburban home in upstate New York, the kind of downpour that makes you feel like the world is unraveling. I stood in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile, tea that had gone cold, staring at the droplets racing down the glass. My name is Claire, 38 years old, a wife, a stepmother, a woman who'd spent the last decade building a life that looked perfect from the outside white picket fence, manicured lawn, a husband who wore tailored suits and shook hands with confidence. But inside, our home was a hollow shell, and I was the ghost haunting it. My husband, David, was upstairs, his face lit by the blue glow of a Zoom meeting, his voice a distant hum through the floorboards. He hadn't looked at me, really looked at me in years. I'd become invisible, a background character in my own story, cooking dinners he barely ate, folding laundry he never noticed, smiling when the neighbors asked how we were doing. "Oh, we're great," I'd say, my voice bright, my chest tight, but I wasn't great. I was starving, not for food, but for something I couldn't name, something I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I felt alive, when my laughter filled rooms, when David would pull me close at night and whisper promises against my skin. But 12 years of marriage had worn those moments thin, like pages in a book read too many times. He stopped kissing me goodbye first, then stopped asking about my day. Eventually, he stopped seeing me altogether. I'd stand in front of him, hair curled, wearing the dress he used to love, and his eyes would slide past me to his phone, his laptop, his laugh that didn't include me. I told myself this was normal, that marriages settle into silence, that expecting more was selfish, so I carried my loneliness like a stone in my pocket, heavy but familiar, and I kept going. I cleaned. I cooked. I smiled, and I waited for something to change, even though I knew it wouldn't. But someone else was watching. Someone else saw the way my hands lingered on the counter when I was tired, the way my eyes dimmed when David walked past without a word. That someone was Noah, David's son from his first marriage. I met Noah when he was 10, a skinny kid with messy brown hair and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He was quiet, thoughtful, always watching from the edges of rooms. We bonded quickly, maybe because I made time for him when his father didn't, maybe because I saw a piece of myself in his stillness. I'd bake cookies with him, help with his homework, cheer at his soccer games when David was too busy. Over the years, he grew taller, stronger, his voice deepening, his shoulders broadening. By 18, he was practically a man, 6 feet tall, with a quiet confidence that made my heart ache with pride. He was my stepson, my family, my boy. But lately, something had shifted. His eyes lingered on me a little too long. His smiles carried a warmth that felt different. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting my own emptiness onto him, but deep down, I knew better. It started, innocently enough. Noah came home from soccer practice one Thursday, limp and slightly, his face tight with pain. He tried to brush it off, but I could see the way he winced when he sat on the couch. "Just tweaked my back," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes betrayed his discomfort. I frowned, maternal instinct kicking in. "You sure? I can call the doctor." He shook his head, his lips quirking into a half smile. "School nurse said, rest and heat. I'll be fine. Claire." But he wasn't fine. Later that night, I found him sprawled awkwardly on the couch, a heating pad pressed against his lower back. His jaw clenched, my heart twisted. "You want some help?" I asked, hesitating in the doorway. He looked up, surprised, his hazel eyes catching the dim light, like with the heating pad. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "I used to help your dad with his back pain. I could give you a quick massage. Might loosen it up." The words felt heavier than they should have, but I pushed the thought away. This was just me being a mom, right? helping someone I cared about. Noah didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his gaze steady, searching. Then quietly he said, "Yeah, I'd like that." My stomach fluttered, but I ignored it, grabbing the bottle of unscented lotion from the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands trembling slightly as he lay face down, lifting his shirt just enough to expose the small of his back. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the TV and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I placed my hands on his skin, warm and tense under my fingers, and started to knead gently. He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing, and for a moment, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. Simple, caring, safe. But then he flinched, just a quick shift, and his shirt rode up higher. My hand brushed bare skin, smooth and warm, and something inside me stirred. Not desire, not yet, but something, a spark, a whisper of something I hadn't felt in years. I pulled my hand back, my voice unsteady, too much pressure. He shook his head, his voice low, almost a murmur. "No, you're the only one who makes me feel cared for." My hands froze. The air in the room thickened. The clock stopped ticking. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I stared at the back of his head, at his messy hair, at the way he didn't move. Didn't take it back? I whispered, barely audible. He didn't repeat it, but he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of his face. His eyes soft, unguarded. "Nothing," he said. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. I should have stood up, walked away, laughed it off. But I didn't. I reached for the lotion again, my fingers shaking, and kept going, pretending nothing had changed. But something had. Something small, quiet, dangerous. And I felt it. The warmth of his words, the weight of his gaze, the way my loneliness cracked open just enough to let something new slip in. After that night, nothing looked different on the surface. Noah didn't bring it up, and I didn't either. We went back to our routines, me in the kitchen, him at school or practice, David lost in his work. But underneath, everything was different. I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, couldn't stop feeling the way his words had landed, like rain on parched ground. "You're the only one who makes me feel cared for." Was he just being sweet, grateful, or was it something else? I told myself I was overthinking, that I was so starved for attention I was twisting an innocent moment into something it wasn't. But then I'd catch him watching me when I was setting the table, when I laughed at something on TV, when I tucked my hair behind my ear. His eyes weren't just watching, they were seeing. And God help me, I loved it. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I dug out my favorite blouse, the soft blue one that made my eyes pop. I wore perfume again, just a light spritz, not for anyone but myself, or so I told myself. I took over my lashes, smoothing my hair. It wasn't about seduction. It was about remembering who I was before I became David's wife, Noah's stepmom, a woman who'd forgotten how to feel alive. But Noah noticed. He'd smile when I walked into the room, his eyes linger in. "You look nice today," he'd say, his voice soft. Or, "That color's really pretty on you." Simple words. But they hit me like oxygen after years underwater. David hadn't complimented me in so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like. He'd walk through the door, toss his keys on the counter, and barely glance my way. Sometimes I'd stand right in front of him, new earrings glinting, and he'd step around. Me like I was furniture. It used to hurt. Then I got used to it. But now, someone was seeing me again, and I hated how much I craved it. The massages became a routine. A few days later, Noah came into the kitchen, wincing, holding his side. "Still hurts," he said, his voice sheepish. Must have slept wrong. I nodded, my heart racing, and just like that, It was a thing. Late evenings, when David was upstairs or out of town, when the house was quiet and the lights were low, Noah would lie on the couch and I'd rub the tension from his shoulders. At first, it was innocent, focused, motherly. But slowly, it changed. Not in what we said. There were no grand declarations, no forbidden words, but in the air between us. My hands lingered longer than they needed to, tracing the lines of his, muscles softer than necessary. His breath grew deeper, his eyes closing as he relaxed under my touch. I started avoiding his gaze because looking at him felt like drowning, but he never looked away. He held my eyes like they were the only thing, keeping him tethered. One night after I finished, I rested my hand on his arm just for a second, before pulling away. He caught it, his fingers gentle but firm, holding me there. My breath caught, my heart hammering. He looked up at me, his eyes raw, unguarded. "Do you ever wish things were different?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, my mind, scrambling for an answer, but none came. He kept going, his words careful, deliberate, like you were with someone who saw you. That word "saw" hit me like a punch, because he did. He saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the longing I hid behind forced smiles and small talk. He saw the way I hesitated before answering David's half-hearted questions, knowing he wasn't really listening. And more than that, he made me feel seen. I pulled my hand away, my voice shaking. "We can't talk like this, Noah." But he didn't push. He just nodded, his eyes sad, and let me go. After that, things kept building, not in loud, obvious ways, but in quiet, dangerous ones. Noah started helping around the house, more bringing in groceries, making me tea in the afternoons, sliding the mug across the counter with a small smile. He'd sit with me while I cooked, asking about my day, really listening. He'd share things too, about school, his friends, how lost he felt sometimes. And I listened, because no one was listening to me. We became each other's safe space, a refuge from the coldness of the house, from David's absence, from the silence that had settled over our lives. It was terrifying, because nothing we did was wrong. Not yet, but everything felt dangerous. We danced around the truth, afraid to name it, afraid to break the fragile thing we'd built. But the truth has a way of slipping out. It was another rainy night, the kind that makes the world feel small and heavy. David was in Denver for a business trip. His goodbye, a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. No eye contact, no text to say he'd landed. The house felt cavernous without him, the silence louder than ever. I was upstairs trying to read. When I heard Noah come in, his footsteps slow, deliberate. He called out, his voice tight. "Claire, my back's killing me again. The rain, it's worse." He didn't ask outright, just stood in the hallway, his damp hoodie clinging to him, pain etched across his face. "I can't sleep like this," he mumbled, gesturing to his lower back, his hips. My stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed to say goodnight, to tell him to take a hot shower and stretch. But I looked at him, his slumped shoulders, his tired eyes, and something in me softened. Or maybe it broke. "Okay," I said quietly, just for a little bit. He followed me to the living room. I grabbed the lotion, my hands moving on autopilot, but nothing about this felt routine. He lay on his stomach, shirt off, the dim light casting shadows across his skin. The rain pounded outside, the clock ticked, my heart raced. I sat beside him, my hands trembling as I touched his skin, warm and tight with strain. I worked slowly, focusing on the movement, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. He breathed deeply, his body relaxing, and for a moment it was just a massage. But then he reached out, his hand resting on mine. Not forceful, not sudden, but quiet. like a question. I froze, every thought shutting off, every nerve on fire. I should have pulled away. I wanted to, but I didn't. I stayed there, my hand under his skin warm against mine. He turned slowly, carefully, until he was lying on his side, facing me. His eyes met mine, raw, unshielded. "Why do we have to pretend?" he asked, his voice sad, honest, not a trace of manipulation. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. He waited, his gaze steady, and finally, I whispered, "It's wrong." He nodded, but he didn't move away, didn't break eye contact. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek, light as a feather. Closed my eyes, my heart screaming, my mind racing when I opened them. He was closer, so close I could feel his breath. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. We just existed in that fragile space, teetering on the edge of something we both wanted and feared. For one suspended moment, time stopped. The rain fell, the wind howled, but in that room, everything was still. The line between us didn't blur, it vanished. The morning after, I couldn't look at myself, not in the mirror, not in the glass of the hallway picture frames, not even in my own mind. I kept telling myself nothing had happened, that we hadn't crossed any physical lines, that no words were spoken that couldn't be taken back. But it didn't matter. Something had happened, and we both knew it. The silence between us wasn't safe anymore. It was suffocating. I started avoiding Noah, lingering in my room, leaving the kitchen when I heard his footsteps, finding chores to keep me busy. I thought if I stayed in motion, the guilt would fade. That if I kept moving, I wouldn't see his eyes in my mind, hear his voice, feel the weight of what we'd almost done. But every time I turned around, he was there, not pushing, not speaking, just watching. Not in a predatory way, but in a way that made my chest ache. His eyes too soft, too knowing, and every time our gazes met, I had to look away. Guilt seeped into everything, making coffee guilt, folding his laundry guilt, laughing at something on TV when he walked in guilt. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what I'd felt, what I was still feeling. I didn't know what I was guilty of wanting to be seen, enjoying his attention, not stopping something that hadn't fully started. David noticed, but not in the way I needed. "You're quiet lately," he'd say, his eyes already back on his laptop. "You okay?" I'd nod, my throat tight, wanting to scream. "I'm breaking, and you don't even see it." But I didn't. I knew he'd offer some hollow suggestion, a spa day, a new hobby, and go back to his world. That's the thing about loneliness, it's not always about being alone. Sometimes it's lying next to someone every night who doesn't know you're drowning. A few days later, I found a folded piece of paper on my nightstand. No envelope, no signature, just Noah's handwriting. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line, but I meant everything I said." My hands shook as I read it, my heart pounding. I should have torn it up, thrown it out, burned it, but I didn't. I folded it carefully, tucked it into a drawer under a pile of old scarves, and closed it like I could lock away what it meant, but I couldn't. That note was proof that I wasn't imagining it, proof that I wasn't alone in feeling it, proof that I didn't want to let go. And that terrified me, because if I was honest, part of me wanted to hold on to his words, to the warmth, to the feeling of being chosen. What did that say about me? I've always thought of myself as strong, the kind of woman who holds it together, who knows right from wrong, and chooses right, even when no one's watching. But now, I wasn't sure. Loneliness isn't loud. It doesn't scream or beg. It waits, patient, and quiet until it's woven into your bones, until you forget what warmth feels like. Noah didn't push, didn't demand. He whispered. He looked at me like I was more than a wife, more than a stepmom, more than a shadow. He noticed the way I tucked my hair when I was nervous, the way my smile faltered when David ignored me. He listened. When I spoke, really listened and asked how I was, not out of habit, but because he cared. And that broke me. Not the night on the couch, not the note, but the slow, steady way he made me feel human again. I started questioning everything. Did I lead him on with my smiles, my willingness to help, my need for connection? Was I selfish, using his attention to fill the void David left? Or did I believe it was harmless until it wasn't? I wanted to believe I was caught off guard, that I was just fragile and lonely, that it excused the parts of me I was afraid to face. But the truth was harder. Maybe I didn't stop it because I didn't want to. Maybe I held on to the warmth, the feeling of being seen, because it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. And now, I was living with the weight of it, the fear of what could have happened, the guilt of what almost did. I kept thinking about how close we came to something irreversible if Noah had leaned in that night. If I hadn't whispered, "It's wrong," would I have stopped him? Would I have pulled away? Or would I have let go? That question haunts me because the woman I thought I was, she'd have never let it get this far. She'd have seen the signs, closed the door before the breeze slipped in. But the woman I am now, she lingered, she listened, she kept the note. And maybe that's the hardest part, realizing that even if you don't act on something, the feelings can still live in you. They do. They live in me. This isn't a story about betrayal or desire. It's about being human, about emptiness, about how desperate we become to feel anything when we've gone too long feeling nothing. It's about silence, how it wraps around you, gently at first, then becomes the loudest thing in the room. And it's about boundaries, about understanding where they lie and why they matter. If I could go back, I'd talk to Noah not as a stepmom, not as a friend, but as an adult. I'd tell him that what we were feeling wasn't love or destiny. It was loneliness, a shared ache that felt like connection, but wasn't. I'd explain that boundaries aren't just rules, they're safeguards, protecting us from hurting ourselves and others. I'd tell him that consent and context matter, that emotions can trick us into seeing what we want instead of what's real. And I'd tell myself to seek help, to talk to a therapist, to confront David, to find a way out of the silence before it consumed me. I didn't cross the line, not fully, but I stood so close I still feel the heat. Sometimes I wonder if I avoided disaster or missed something that would have destroyed me, but also made me feel alive. Either way, I'm changed. I'm learning to rebuild, to find my voice, to demand more from my marriage or walk away if it can't give me what I need. I'm learning that loneliness doesn't justify crossing boundaries, that feeling seen doesn't mean you're in the right. And I'm sharing this because stories like mine live in silence, in shame. But maybe if we speak them, we can understand each other better. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a moment that made you question everything? Where right and wrong weren't clear? Was it about love, connection, or something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story touched you, if you've ever felt lost in the quiet, please like this video and subscribe to Broken Vows. We're a community that doesn't shy away from the hard stuff. We walk through it together. Some roads you never travel, but standing at the edge changes you. Be careful who you open your heart to because someone's always listening. And sometimes it's not the ones who should be, but the ones who want to. That can be beautiful, or it can break you. Sometimes both.